The dust-covered woman standing in the doctor's office held her breath as the gray-haired physician shook his head slowly. His expression, a mixture of pity and professional detachment that made her want to scream. Adelaide Vance was 38 years old, widowed for 3 years, and the words that had just left Dr. Henderson's mouth echoed in her mind like a death sentence to the dreams she had harbored secretly in her heart since her husband Thomas had died in the mining accident that took 12 good men beneath the mountains surrounding Park City, Utah, in the bitter winter of 1876. "Mrs. Vance, I must be frank with you," Dr. Henderson continued, removing his spectacles to clean them with a handkerchief pulled from his vest pocket. "At your age, childbearing would be extraordinarily dangerous. The risks to both mother and child increase significantly after 35, and you are already 38. I strongly advise against even considering such a venture should you remarry. Your childbearing years are behind you, and that is simply the medical reality we must accept." Adelaide felt the weight of those words settle over her shoulders like a heavy wool blanket in summer heat. She had not come to the doctor to discuss hypothetical pregnancies or remarriage. She had come because of the persistent fatigue that had plagued her for months. The way her monthly courses had become irregular and painful. But Dr. Henderson, like everyone else in Park City, seemed to think that a widow of 3 years must be thinking constantly about finding a new husband, about starting over, about replacing what she had lost. "I understand, doctor," she said quietly, gathering her reticule and standing. Her back was straight, her chin lifted. Adelaide Vance had not survived 3 years of running a boarding house alone, of managing finances and dealing with rough miners and merchants, only to crumble under the weight of one more disappointment. "Thank you for your time." She stepped out into the bright September afternoon of 1879, the mountain air crisp and clean in her lungs. Park City sprawled before her in its usual chaotic vitality, a silver mining town that had exploded from a few scattered cabins to a thriving community of over 5,000 souls in less than a decade. The streets were crowded with freight wagons hauling ore from the mines, with men on horseback, with women in their practical day dresses hurrying between the dry goods store and the butcher shop. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the rhythmic pounding of the stamp mills that processed the silver ore, a sound that never ceased, day or night. Adelaide made her way down Main Street toward the boarding house she had managed to keep running through sheer determination, and the small savings Thomas had left her. It was a 3-story building with a wide front porch, painted a cheerful yellow that stood out among the more somber browns and grays of the neighboring structures. She took pride in her establishment. The rooms were always clean, the meals substantial and well prepared, and she had a reputation for being fair but firm with her boarders. As she approached the house, she noticed a man sitting on the porch steps, his hat pulled low over his face, a worn leather saddlebag resting beside him. He looked up as her footsteps sounded on the wooden walkway, and Adelaide found herself meeting a pair of steady gray eyes in a weathered face that spoke of long days under the sun and nights under the stars. "Madam," he said, rising to his feet with an easy grace that suggested he spent more time on horseback than on solid ground. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean build of a working man. His clothes were dusty from travel but well maintained, and there was something in his bearing that commanded respect without demanding it. "I was told you might have a room available. Name is Samuel Morrison. I am looking for steady lodging while I work at the Ontario mine." Adelaide assessed him quickly, a skill she had developed over the years of taking in boarders. He looked to be in his early 30s, perhaps 33 or 34, with sun-bleached brown hair and a face that was handsome in a rugged, unpretentious way. His hands were calloused but clean, his boots worn but polished. A working man who took pride in himself but was not vain about it. "I do have a room," she said, unlocking the front door. "I charge $4 a week, which includes breakfast and supper. Linens are changed every Monday. No drinking in the rooms, no bringing women upstairs, and no fighting under my roof. Break any of those rules and you will find yourself out on the street with no refund. Do we have an understanding, Mr. Morrison?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, madam." Crystal clear understanding. She led him inside, through the tidy parlor with its assortment of mismatched but comfortable furniture, up the stairs to the second floor. The room she showed him was at the back of the house, overlooking the small garden she maintained with stubborn determination despite the short growing season. It was simply furnished with a bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a chair by the window. "This will suit me fine," Samuel Morrison said, setting his saddlebag on the bed. He pulled out a leather wallet and counted out 4 silver dollars, placing them in her hand. His fingers were warm and rough when they brushed against her palm, and Adelaide felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that she immediately pushed away. "Breakfast is at 6, supper at 7, she said briskly. "If you miss a meal, I do not hold it for you. The washroom is at the end of the hall. You will share it with 3 other boarders, all of whom work at the mines and keep regular hours." "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," he said, and she realized with a start that she had not told him her name. He must have asked someone in town about the boarding house. "I appreciate your hospitality." Over the following weeks, Samuel Morrison proved to be a model boarder. He was punctual for meals, quiet in his comings and goings, and polite to everyone in the house. He worked as a surveyor for the Ontario mine, one of the most successful silver operations in the area, and Adelaide learned from conversations over the dinner table that he had come from Montana Territory, where he had worked on a cattle ranch before deciding to try his hand at mine work. What set him apart from her other boarders, though, was the way he seemed to notice things. When one of the porch steps developed a crack, he fixed it without being asked. When Adelaide struggled to carry a heavy crate of potatoes from the delivery wagon, he appeared at her elbow to lift it as though it weighed nothing. He never presumed, never overstepped, but he was there, a steady presence that she found both comforting and unsettling. It was late October when he found her in the kitchen one evening after supper, struggling with the balky door of the old cast-iron stove that heated the room. The latch had been sticking for days, and Adelaide had been meaning to ask one of the boarders to look at it, but somehow the request always slipped her mind. "Let me see if I can help," Samuel said from the doorway, and she jumped, not having heard him approach. "You startled me," she said, pressing a hand to her chest where her heart was beating faster than it should. "I apologize. I did not mean to sneak up on you." He moved into the kitchen, kneeling beside the stove to examine the latch. His hands moved with practiced competence, and within minutes he had the mechanism working smoothly again. "There. That should hold for a while, but you might want to get a new latch when you can. This one is wearing out." "Thank you," Adelaide said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I have been meaning to fix that for days." Samuel stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Mrs. Vance, I hope you do not mind me saying so, but you work too hard. This is a big house to manage alone." "I manage just fine," she said, a edge of defensiveness creeping into her voice. She had heard variations of this sentiment before, always with the underlying implication that a woman alone could not handle such responsibilities. "I did not mean to suggest you could not," he said quickly. "I only meant that you should not have to. A woman like you deserves someone to help share the load." There was something in his tone, in the way his gray eyes held hers, that made Adelaide's breath catch. She was not a foolish girl to be turned by a handsome face and a few kind words, but there was sincerity in Samuel Morrison that she had not encountered in a long time. "A woman like me," she repeated slowly. "What kind of woman is that, Mr. Morrison?" He did not look away. "A strong woman. A capable woman. A woman who has built something worth having through her own hard work and determination." He paused, and then added quietly, "A beautiful woman who deserves to be more than alone." Adelaide felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Morrison, I think we should maintain appropriate boundaries as landlady and boarder." "You are right, of course," he said, but he did not look chastened. "I apologize if I have made you uncomfortable. That was not my intention." He moved toward the door, then turned back. "But Mrs. Vance, I want you to know that my words were sincere. I hope you will forgive the impropriety of them." After he left, Adelaide stood in the kitchen for a long moment, her hands gripping the edge of the work table. She was 38 years old, past the age when women were supposed to inspire romantic interest, especially from a man who was clearly several years younger. Dr. Henderson's words echoed in her mind. Her childbearing years were behind her. What could she possibly offer a man like Samuel Morrison, who deserved a young wife who could give him children? But as the days passed into November, Adelaide found herself increasingly aware of Samuel's presence. She noticed the way he always seemed to choose the chair at the dinner table that gave him a view of where she sat. She noticed how he lingered after meals, helping clear dishes despite her protests that it was not necessary. She noticed the small kindnesses. A handful of wildflowers left on the kitchen table with no note. A stack of firewood split and neatly stacked without being asked. Her favorite tea mysteriously restocked when she had been too busy to go to the mercantile. The first snow came early that year, a heavy storm that blanketed Park City in white and sent temperatures plummeting. Adelaide woke before dawn as always, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cold, and made her way downstairs to start the kitchen fire and begin preparing breakfast. She was surprised to find the kitchen already warm, a fire crackling in the stove, and Samuel Morrison standing at the counter, his sleeves rolled up, kneading dough. "What are you doing?" she asked, too surprised to be properly scandalized by the sight of a man in her kitchen at 5 in the morning. "I heard you coughing last night," he said, not pausing in his work. "Thought you might be coming down with something and could use an extra hour of sleep. I hope you do not mind." "My mother taught me to make decent biscuits, and I took the liberty of starting breakfast." Adelaide should have been offended. She should have reminded him of proper boundaries and sent him back upstairs. Instead, she found herself pulling out a chair and sinking into it, suddenly aware of how bone-tired she was. The cough that had been plaguing her for a week had kept her up most of the night, and the thought of beginning her usual routine had felt overwhelming. "That is very kind of you," she said quietly, "but you do not have to do this." "I know I do not have to," Samuel said, shaping the dough into rounds and placing them on a baking sheet. "I want to." He slid the biscuits into the oven and turned to face her. "Mrs. Vance, Adelaide, if I may be so bold, I have something I need to say to you, and I would appreciate it if you would hear me out before you respond." Her heart began to pound. "Mr. Morrison, Samuel, please." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his hands folded on the table between them. "I have been boarding here for 2 months now, and in that time I have come to admire you more than I can properly express. You are intelligent, capable, kind, and honest. You work harder than any person I have ever met, and you do it with grace and dignity. You have built a life for yourself when many women would have given up or remarried out of desperation. I respect that. I respect you." Samuel, Adelaide said, her voice shaking slightly. I am 38 years old. You cannot be more than 33 or 34. You should be looking for a young woman who can give you children, who can give you a family. I am 33, he confirmed, and I am not looking for a young woman. I am looking at the woman I want, and she is sitting right in front of me. He reached across the table, his hand extended palm up in invitation. After a moment's hesitation, Adelaide placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. I have heard the gossip in town, Adelaide. I know what Dr. Henderson told you. I know people think you are too old to have children. I want you to understand something very clearly. I do not care. Tears pricked at Adelaide's eyes. But you should care. You deserve children, a family. What I deserve is a woman who I love and who loves me in return. Everything else is just details. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. Adelaide, I fell in love with you the first day I met you, when you stood on that porch with your back straight and your chin up, making sure I understood your rules. I fell more in love with you every day after that. The way you treat your boarders with fairness and kindness. The way you refuse to let anyone take advantage of you. The way you hum when you think no one is listening. The way you tend that garden like it is the most important thing in the world. I love you, Adelaide Vance, and I do not give a damn what any doctor or anyone else says about your age or your ability to have children. But what if I cannot give you children? Adelaide whispered, the fear that had been gnawing at her heart finally spoken aloud. What if you regret choosing me? Then we will have each other, and that will be enough, Samuel said firmly. Adelaide, I have worked on ranches and in mines and traveled across half the country. I have seen men with a dozen children who do not know how to love their wives, and I have seen couples without children who build lives full of joy and purpose. Children are a blessing, yes, but they are not the only blessing, and they are not the measure of a marriage. Adelaide felt the tears spill over, running down her cheeks. I do not know what to say. Say yes, Samuel said. Say you will marry me. Say you will let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much you are loved and valued and treasured. Say you will take a chance on a cowboy turned surveyor who has never been good at pretty words but who will work every day to make you happy. She wanted to say yes. Oh, how she wanted to say yes. But years of being practical, of being responsible, of not allowing herself to dream too much, held her back. This is all very sudden, she said. We have only known each other for 2 months. I know my own heart, Samuel said, but if you need time, I will give you time. I am not going anywhere, Adelaide. I will wait as long as you need me to wait. The biscuits were ready, filling the kitchen with their warm, yeasty smell. Samuel rose to pull them from the oven, and Adelaide sat in her chair, her mind whirling. She thought about the empty years since Thomas had died, the loneliness that she had learned to carry like a familiar weight. She thought about Dr. Henderson's words, about the pitying looks she received from married women in town, about the assumption that her life was essentially over because she was nearly 40 and widowed. And then she thought about Samuel's steady gray eyes, his gentle hands, his quiet competence. She thought about waking up every morning with someone who saw her not as a fading woman past her prime, but as someone worth loving, worth choosing, worth treasuring. Yes, she heard herself say, and Samuel turned from the stove, his face transforming with joy. Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Morrison. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled her to her feet, his arms wrapping around her with a gentleness that made her feel both protected and cherished. You will not regret this, he murmured against her hair. I promise you, Adelaide, you will not regret this. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Adelaide wore a dove gray dress with pearl buttons, practical and pretty, and Samuel wore a new suit that he had purchased from the tailor with obvious pride. The handful of guests included Adelaide's other boarders, a few women from the church auxiliary, and Samuel's supervisor from the Ontario mine. Dr. Henderson attended as well, his presence a surprise to Adelaide. After the ceremony, as the small group gathered for cake and coffee in the church hall, the doctor approached the newlyweds. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, and Adelaide felt a small thrill at hearing her new name. "I wanted to offer my congratulations and also my apologies." "Apologies?" Adelaide asked, puzzled. The doctor cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "I fear I may have been too harsh in my assessment during your visit. While it is true that childbearing at your age carries increased risks, I should not have spoken so definitively about what you should or should not do with your life. That was not my place, and I am sorry if my words caused you distress." Samuel's hand tightened on Adelaide's waist. "Doctor, I appreciate your concern for my wife's health, but I want to make something very clear. Adelaide's value is not determined by her ability to bear children. I married her because I love her, and that love is not contingent on anything other than who she is as a person." The doctor nodded slowly. "You are a fortunate man, Mr. Morrison, and Mrs. Morrison, you have chosen well." He paused, then added, "If you do find yourself with child, please come see me immediately. I will do everything in my power to ensure the healthiest outcome possible." After he left, Adelaide leaned into Samuel's solid warmth. "That was unexpected," she murmured. "Good people can say thoughtless things," Samuel said. "What matters is that he recognized it and apologized." He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "Adelaide, I meant every word I said. You are everything to me. Everything." They moved into the largest room at the boarding house, the one that had been Adelaide's private space for the past 3 years. Samuel insisted on keeping his job at the mine, but he also took over many of the heavier tasks around the house: chopping wood, hauling water, managing the more difficult boarders. Adelaide found herself with more time to focus on the cooking and cleaning that she actually enjoyed, less overwhelmed by the sheer physical labor of maintaining the property. But more than the practical help, Samuel brought joy back into her life. He made her laugh with stories of his cowboy days in Montana, of ornery cattle and stubborn horses, and the vast beauty of the open range. He listened with genuine interest when she talked about her dreams of expanding the garden, of maybe getting a few chickens, of turning the 3rd floor into proper guest rooms instead of storage space. He held her at night with a tenderness that made her feel cherished rather than merely desired. The winter was hard, as winters always were in the mountains, but Adelaide found herself less bothered by the cold and the snow because she had Samuel's warmth beside her. They fell into comfortable rhythms, mornings beginning with coffee shared in the quiet kitchen before the boarders woke, evenings ending with reading aloud by the fire, Sundays spent walking through the snow-covered town, or staying bundled together indoors when the weather was too bitter. It was in February, during one of the worst blizzards Adelaide had seen in years, that she first suspected something had changed. She woke feeling queasy, the smell of the coffee Samuel was brewing in the kitchen suddenly overwhelming and unpleasant. She rushed to the wash basin, her stomach heaving, and Samuel was there immediately, holding back her hair, supporting her with steady hands. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etched in his features. "Should I fetch the doctor?" "No," Adelaide said, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "No, I think. Samuel, I think I might be pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, impossibly heavy and light at the same time. Samuel's eyes widened, and then he was on his knees in front of her, his hands gripping hers. "Are you certain?" "Not certain, but—" Adelaide took a shaky breath. "I have been late before. I thought it was just my age, but with the nausea and the way I have been so tired lately." She looked at him, fear and hope warring in her chest. "Samuel, I am scared. What if Dr. Henderson was right? What if I am putting myself in danger?" "Then we will face that together," Samuel said firmly. "But Adelaide, if you are carrying our child, that is a miracle, a gift. And yes, there might be risks, but we will handle those risks. I will not let anything happen to you. Do you understand me?" "Nothing." They waited another week before going to see Dr. Henderson, wanting to be sure before involving anyone else. The doctor's examination confirmed what Adelaide already knew in her heart. She was pregnant, probably about 2 months along, which meant the baby would arrive sometime in September. Dr. Henderson was serious but not unkind as he laid out the realities. "Mrs. Morrison, I will not lie to you. This pregnancy will be difficult. You are at higher risk for complications. You will need to rest more than a younger woman would. You will need to see me regularly so I can monitor your health and the baby's development. And when the time comes for delivery, it may be long and difficult." "We understand," Samuel said, his arm around Adelaide's shoulders. "Tell us what we need to do and we will do it." Over the following months, Samuel became fiercely protective in ways that Adelaide found both touching and occasionally frustrating. He insisted she rest every afternoon, taking over even more of the boarding house duties. He cooked meals when Adelaide was too tired or nauseous to manage it. He fretted over every twinge and ache, ready to rush for the doctor at a moment's notice. "I am pregnant, not made of glass." Adelaide protested one April afternoon when Samuel tried to prevent her from hanging laundry on the line. "I know that," Samuel said, taking the basket from her hands. "But humor me, Adelaide. I cannot carry this child for you, so let me do what I can to make things easier." She softened, seeing the real fear beneath his protective instincts. "I know you are worried," she said gently. "I am worried too. But Samuel, women have been having babies since the beginning of time, many of them in far worse circumstances than mine. I have a good doctor, a warm home, enough to eat, and a husband who loves me. Those are advantages many women do not have." As her belly swelled through the spring and into the summer, Adelaide found herself surprised by how well she felt. Yes, she was tired, and yes, there were aches and pains and the awkwardness of her changing body. But there was also a sense of profound rightness, of joy that she had never expected to experience. When the baby first moved inside her, a flutter like butterfly wings, she had cried, and Samuel had held her and marveled at the miracle of the life they had created together. The other boarders, rough miners who had seemed like unlikely participants in domestic life, surprised her with their kindness. They tiptoed around in the mornings when Adelaide was sleeping late. They brought her small gifts. A rocking chair one of them had carved, a tiny blanket another had purchased at the mercantile, wildflowers picked on the mountainside and presented with awkward gallantry. The women of Park City, too, rallied around her in ways she had not expected. The church auxiliary organized a quilting bee, creating a beautiful baby quilt with squares contributed by dozens of hands. Neighbors brought over meals and hand-me-down baby clothes. Even women who had previously been cool toward her, perhaps judging her for remaining unmarried for so long or for marrying a younger man, seemed to soften in the face of her obvious happiness and Samuel's devoted care. Dr. Henderson examined her every 2 weeks, and while he remained cautious, he also seemed increasingly optimistic. "You are doing well, Mrs. Morrison," he told her in July. "Better than I honestly expected. Keep doing what you are doing, eating well, resting, letting that husband of yours take care of you. August brought intense heat to the mountain valley, and Adelaide spent most days in the coolest parts of the house, moving slowly, her hands often resting on her swollen belly. The baby was active, kicking and turning, and sometimes Samuel would place his hand beside hers to feel the movements, his face filled with such wonder and love that Adelaide felt her heart might burst. "What do you think we should name this child?" Adelaide asked one evening as they sat on the porch, catching what little breeze there was. "For a boy, I was thinking maybe James, after my father," Samuel said. "For a girl, perhaps Claire. It was my mother's middle name." "James and Claire," Adelaide repeated, trying the names out. "I like them." "James Morrison, Claire Morrison," she smiled. "Either one sounds perfect." "Adelaide," Samuel said suddenly, his voice serious, "I want you to know something. No matter what happens when this baby comes, no matter how things go, you are the most important thing to me. You understand? If it comes to a choice, I will choose you. Every time I will choose you." Adelaide felt tears sting her eyes, a common occurrence these days when her emotions seem to live so close to the surface. "That is not a choice you should have to make." "I pray I never have to," Samuel said. "But I needed you to know where I stand. I love this baby already, Adelaide. I love what we created together. But I fell in love with you first, and you will always be my priority." Labor began in the early morning hours of September 15th, a date Adelaide would remember for the rest of her life with crystal clarity. The first pain woke her from sleep, a tightening across her belly that was unmistakable. She lay still for a moment, breathing through it, and then reached over to shake Samuel awake. "Samuel, it is time." He was on his feet instantly, pulling on clothes, his face pale in the lamplight. "I am getting the doctor. Do not move, do not do anything. Just stay right there." Despite the pain and fear, Adelaide had to smile at his panic. "Samuel, first babies take a long time. There is no need to panic. Just go get Dr. Henderson and tell him to come when he is ready." But Samuel was already out the door, his boots thundering down the stairs. Adelaide heard the front door slam, and then she was alone with the darkness and the pain that was beginning to build in waves. The other boarders, woken by the commotion, knocked tentatively on the door. Mrs. Barlow, the widow from across the street who had offered to help with the birth, arrived before the doctor, her competent hands and calm voice a blessing. She helped Adelaide out of bed, walking her around the room, explaining that movement would help the labor progress. Dr. Henderson arrived an hour later, his medical bag in hand, his expression serious but encouraging. "Well, Mrs. Morrison, it seems your baby has decided it is time to make an appearance. Let us see how you are progressing." What followed were hours that blurred together into a haze of pain and exhaustion and determined effort. Labor was hard, harder than Adelaide had imagined, and there were moments when she understood why Dr. Henderson had been so concerned. But Samuel never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed at him through the pain. "You can do this, Adelaide," he said over and over. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do this, Mrs. Barlow and Dr. Henderson worked together with practiced efficiency, and as the afternoon sun began to slant through the bedroom windows, the doctor finally said the words Adelaide had been desperate to hear. "All right, Mrs. Morrison. With the next pain, I need you to push. Your baby is ready to be born." Adelaide pushed with every ounce of strength she had left, and then suddenly there was a release of pressure, a moment of shocked relief, and then a sound that made her heart soar, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. "It is a boy," Dr. Henderson said, and Adelaide saw him carefully cleaning the infant, wrapping him in a soft blanket. A healthy, strong boy with a fine set of lungs. Samuel was crying, tears streaming down his face unashamedly as the doctor placed the baby in Adelaide's arms. He was small, red-faced, perfect beyond words. Adelaide looked down at her son, at the tiny features and the dark hair plastered to his head, and felt a wave of love so intense it took her breath away. "James," she whispered. "James Morrison." "He is beautiful," Samuel said, his voice choked with emotion. "Adelaide, he is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." Dr. Henderson finished his work, examining Adelaide thoroughly before nodding with satisfaction. "You did very well, Mrs. Morrison. Better than I expected, if I am being honest. You will need to rest, of course, and heal, but I see no complications. You have a healthy son, and you survived a birth that I was not certain you would. I am very glad to have been proven wrong about my earlier dire predictions." Over the next weeks, Adelaide recovered slowly but steadily. Samuel took a leave from the mine, refusing to go back to work until he was certain both Adelaide and James were thriving. He changed diapers and walked the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night. He cooked meals and managed the boarding house and still found time to sit beside Adelaide's bed, holding her hand, marveling at what they had created together. "They said I was too old," Adelaide said one night as she nursed James, watching Samuel's face in the lamplight. "They said it was too dangerous, that I should not even try." "They were wrong," Samuel said simply. "Not about the dangers, maybe. Those were real, but wrong about you, wrong about what you could do, wrong about what we could do together." As autumn turned to winter and then to spring again, life in the Morrison household found its rhythm. James grew fat and happy, his lungs strong, his appetite insatiable. Adelaide healed completely, regaining her strength and energy, though she was more than happy to let Samuel continue handling the heavier work around the boarding house. The town of Park City, which had watched Adelaide's pregnancy with a mixture of concern and fascination, now watched James grow with proprietary interest. He became something of a local celebrity, the baby who should not have been but was, healthy and thriving against the odds. One afternoon in May, as Adelaide sat in the garden with James on a blanket beside her, watching Samuel repair a section of fence, she found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for the unexpected path her life had taken. She was 39 years old, a mother to a beautiful baby boy, married to a man who loved her with a devotion that still sometimes took her breath away. Samuel looked up from his work, caught her watching him, and grinned. He crossed the garden and dropped down onto the blanket beside her, pulling her into his arms while James gurgled happily between them. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Adelaide said. "How lucky we are." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Samuel said. "This was choice, Adelaide. I chose you. You chose me. We chose to build this life together despite what anyone said, despite the fears and the doubts. That was not luck. That was love." James chose that moment to grab his father's finger with a surprisingly strong grip, and Samuel laughed, the sound full of pure joy. Adelaide watched her husband and son together, these two people who had transformed her life so completely, and knew that Samuel was right. This was not luck. This was love, deliberate and chosen and fought for, and it was more precious than any silver that had ever been pulled from the mountains surrounding their town. As the months passed into years, the Morrison family continued to thrive. James grew into a sturdy, cheerful toddler with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined chin. The boarding house prospered under the joint management of Adelaide and Samuel, who had eventually reduced his hours at the mine to spend more time helping with the business. They added chickens to the yard, and Adelaide's garden expanded to include not just vegetables but flowers that bloomed in riotous colors through the short mountain summer. When James was 2 years old, Adelaide discovered to her shock and delight that she was pregnant again. This time, Dr. Henderson was less cautious in his warnings, noting that Adelaide had proven herself more than capable of handling pregnancy and childbirth. The second pregnancy was easier in some ways, harder in others, but Adelaide had the confidence born of experience and the unwavering support of Samuel, who met the news of a second child with the same wonder and joy he had shown with the first. Their daughter, Claire, was born in April of 1882, a spring baby with her mother's dark hair and a disposition as sunny as the season of her birth. James was initially skeptical of this new person, who demanded so much of his parents' attention. But within weeks, he had appointed himself her protector, hovering near her cradle and announcing to anyone who would listen that this was his baby sister. Adelaide was 41 when Claire was born, and there were women in Park City who shook their heads and called it unseemly for a woman of her age to be having babies. But there were far more who looked at the Morrison family, at the obvious love and happiness that radiated from them, and felt something like hope. If Adelaide Morrison could find love and build a family at an age when most people had written her off, perhaps there was room for unexpected joy in anyone's life. Samuel continued to be the kind of husband that made other women look at their own marriages with new eyes. He was devoted without being possessive, supportive without being condescending, and he loved Adelaide with a steadiness that only deepened with time. He treasured her not despite her age, but because of who she was: strong, capable, kind, and endlessly resilient. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Adelaide with a gift that made her cry. It was a photograph, the first one they had ever taken as a family. In it, Samuel stood tall and proud, his hand on Adelaide's shoulder. Adelaide sat in a chair, Claire in her arms, while James stood beside his father, trying his best to stay still for the long exposure. But what made Adelaide cry was not the photograph itself, but what Samuel had written on the back in his careful handwriting. "To my darling Adelaide, who they said was too old, who proved them all wrong, who gave me everything I never knew I needed. You are my heart, my home, my happiness. Every moment with you is treasure. All my love always, Samuel." Adelaide pressed the photograph to her chest, tears streaming down her face, while Samuel held her and James and Claire looked on with the mild confusion of children who could not yet understand the depth of their parents' love. "I love you," Adelaide whispered against Samuel's shoulder. "I love you so much." "I know," Samuel said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "And I love you. I will love you until the day I die and beyond, Adelaide Morrison. That is a promise." As the years continued to unfold, the Morrison family became a fixture in Park City. They were known for their kindness, their hard work, and the obvious affection they had for each other. The boarding house remained successful, eventually expanding to include the entire 3rd floor when their children were old enough that Adelaide felt comfortable taking on more guests. James and Claire grew up surrounded by love, and the constant flow of boarders who came and went through their home. They learned early how to interact with people from all walks of life, how to work hard, and how to treat everyone with respect. They also learned from watching their parents what a good marriage looked like: partnership, respect, laughter, and love that weathered every storm. When James was 10 and Claire was 8, the family took a trip back to Montana Territory to visit the ranch where Samuel had worked as a young man. It was a long journey by train and stagecoach, but Samuel wanted his children to see the wide open spaces where he had learned about horses and cattle, and the kind of hard work that built character. They spent 2 weeks on the ranch, and Adelaide watched Samuel come alive in a new way as he rode across the range with James behind him on the saddle, teaching his son the skills he had learned as a cowboy. Claire was equally delighted with the ranch life, insisting on helping feed chickens and collect eggs and pet every horse in the stable. On the last night of their visit, as they sat around a campfire under a vast sky full of stars, Samuel pulled Adelaide close and pointed up at the heavens. "See that constellation there," he said, indicating a cluster of stars. "That is Cassiopeia. My father taught me to find it when I was about James's age. He said it was important to always know how to find your way home, no matter how far you wandered. And did you find your way home?" Adelaide asked softly. Samuel looked at her, his face illuminated by firelight, his eyes full of love. "I did. Home is not Montana, Adelaide. Home is not any place. Home is you, you and James and Claire. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." James and Claire, drowsy from the long day and the warmth of the fire, had fallen asleep leaning against each other, and Adelaide looked at her family, her heart full to overflowing. She thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, standing in Dr. Henderson's office, being told that her childbearing years were over, that she was too old to dream of marriage and motherhood. She thought about how close she had come to believing those words, to accepting them as the final verdict on her life. And then she thought about Samuel, who had seen her not as a woman past her prime, but as someone worth loving, worth choosing, worth treasuring. He had married her knowing that there might never be children, and when there were children, he had celebrated that miracle without ever suggesting that it made her more valuable in his eyes. She had always been enough, just as she was. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, echoing the question he had asked so many times over the years. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Adelaide said. "For you, for our children, for every moment of this life we have built together. They said I was too old, Samuel, but you married me anyway. And you have treasured every moment, just like you promised you would." "It has been the easiest promise I have ever kept," Samuel said. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, while the fire crackled and the stars wheeled overhead and their children slept peacefully nearby, safe and loved and completely unaware of how remarkable their very existence was. The years flowed on like a river, steady and sure. James grew into a young man who had his father's height and his mother's practical wisdom. Claire became a bright, determined girl who was equally comfortable helping in the kitchen or climbing trees in the backyard. The boarding house continued to thrive, a warm and welcoming place that earned a reputation as one of the best establishments in Park City. Adelaide's hair, which had been dark when she married Samuel, gradually silvered, and lines appeared at the corners of her eyes from years of laughter and sun. Samuel's face weathered further, his hands grew more calloused, but his love for Adelaide never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and the knowledge that they had built something rare and precious together. When Adelaide turned 50, Samuel organized a party that filled the boarding house with friends and neighbors. There was cake and music and dancing, and at one point, Samuel pulled Adelaide into his arms and waltzed her around the parlor while everyone clapped and cheered. "50 years old," Adelaide said, slightly breathless from the dancing. "I am officially an old woman." "You are the most beautiful woman in this room," Samuel said firmly. "Age is just a number, Adelaide. What matters is how we live, how we love, how we treat each other. And by those measures, you are ageless." James, now 15 and already taller than his father, grinned from across the room. "Father is right, Mother. You are not old. You are just experienced." Claire, 13 and already showing signs of the beauty she would become, added, And you are much nicer than Mrs. Patterson down the street, who is only 40 but acts like she is 90. The party continued late into the night, and when everyone had finally left, Adelaide and Samuel stood on the porch of their home, looking out at the quiet street. The mountain air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant smell of smoke from the stamp mills that still operated around the clock. "Thank you," Adelaide said, leaning against Samuel's solid warmth. "For this party, for this life, for everything." "Adelaide Morrison," Samuel said, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. "Thank you for saying yes 5 years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who did not have much to offer except his heart. Thank you for being brave enough to love again, to hope again, to build this beautiful life with me." "It has been the greatest adventure of my life," Adelaide said truthfully, "and I would not change a single moment." They stood there together, husband and wife, partners and best friends, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Inside the house, their children slept soundly, dreaming whatever dreams 15-year-old boys and 13-year-old girls dream. The boarding house was quiet. The other residents settled in their rooms for the night. As the years continued to pass, the Morrison family faced challenges like any family did. There were lean years when the mines produced less silver and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, frightening moments when Adelaide or Samuel or one of the children fell ill, and the others waited anxiously for recovery. There were the normal trials of raising children. James going through a rebellious phase at 16, Claire breaking her arm falling out of a tree at 14. But through it all, the foundation of love that Samuel and Adelaide had built held firm. They faced every challenge together, supporting each other, drawing strength from their partnership. Samuel never stopped treasuring Adelaide, never stopped seeing her as the remarkable woman who had captured his heart. Adelaide never stopped being grateful for the man who had looked past society's expectations and seen her true worth. When James was 18, he announced his intention to go to college in Salt Lake City, to study engineering. It was Samuel who encouraged him to follow his dreams, even though it meant their son would be leaving home. When Claire was 16 and began being courted by the son of the mercantile owner, it was Adelaide who sat her daughter down and talked to her about what to look for in a husband: respect, kindness, partnership, and love that treasured rather than possessed. "Look at your father," Adelaide told Claire. "See how he treats me. That is what you deserve, nothing less. A man who sees your worth, who values your mind as much as your beauty, who will stand beside you as a partner in building a life. Do not settle for less than that, my darling girl. I would rather see you happy and unmarried than married and miserable." Claire took her mother's words to heart, and when she eventually married at 22, it was to a young lawyer who looked at her the way Samuel looked at Adelaide, with love and respect, and wonder that someone so remarkable had chosen him. James found success as an engineer, working on railroad projects throughout the West, but always returning home to Park City for holidays and celebrations. He married at 25, bringing home a sweet-natured schoolteacher named Elizabeth, who won Adelaide's heart immediately with her kindness and her obvious love for James. The years that Adelaide had been told would be empty, the years when she was supposed to accept that her life was essentially over, instead became some of the richest and most rewarding of her existence. She and Samuel grew old together, their love maturing like fine wine, becoming deeper and more complex with age. They became grandparents, first to James and Elizabeth's daughter Sarah, then to Claire's twins, a boy and a girl named Thomas and Emma. Adelaide held her grandchildren and marveled at the impossible gift they represented. If she had listened to Dr. Henderson all those years ago, if she had accepted that she was too old for love and marriage and children, none of this would exist. Not James, not Claire, not these precious grandchildren who called her grandmother and climbed into her lap for stories. Samuel watched Adelaide with their grandchildren and saw the same woman he had fallen in love with decades earlier. Strong, capable, kind, and beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with character. His hair was completely white now, his face deeply lined, his body not as strong as it had been in his youth. But when he looked at Adelaide, he saw not an old woman but his wife, his love, his heart. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the boarding house for a celebration. The house was filled with laughter and love, with the evidence of a life well lived. At one point, James stood up to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "Who taught me and Claire what love really looks like. They say that mother was too old when they married, that there should not have been children, that it was all somehow improper or doomed to fail. But here we stand, a family built on love that refused to listen to what should or should not be. Father, thank you for seeing mother's worth when others could not. Mother, thank you for being brave enough to say yes. And thank you both for showing us that love is not about age or what society expects, but about two people choosing each other every single day." Adelaide cried, as she seemed to do so often these days at any strong emotion, and Samuel held her hand, his grip still strong despite his years. They were 63 and 58 respectively, ages that might have seemed old in some contexts, but felt young when measured by the love they still shared. That night, after everyone had left and they were alone in their room, Samuel helped Adelaide take down her hair, brushing it with gentle strokes the way he had done countless times over the years. It was a ritual they both loved, this quiet intimacy at the end of the day. "You ever regret it?" Adelaide asked suddenly. "Marrying someone older, missing out on years we might have had if I had been younger." Samuel set down the brush and turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "Adelaide Morrison, listen to me very carefully. I have never regretted a single moment with you, not one. Yes, you are 5 years older than me. So what? That means I fell in love with you 5 years sooner than I would have if you had been born at a different time. That means I have had 5 extra years of your wisdom, your strength, your love. How could I possibly regret that? But we will not have as many years together as we might have otherwise," Adelaide said, voicing the fear that sometimes woke her in the night. "I will likely die before you do. You will be alone." "Then I will treasure every moment we have left," Samuel said firmly. "Adelaide, I would rather have whatever time we have together, whether it is 1 year or 20, than a lifetime without you. You are my treasure. You have always been my treasure. Age does not change that." They made love that night with the slow tenderness of long practice, of two people who knew each other's bodies as well as they knew their own, who found joy in giving pleasure as much as receiving it. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Adelaide felt a peace that went soul deep. She had been treasured. From the moment Samuel Morrison had sat on her porch steps asking for a room, through their courtship and marriage, through the miraculous births of their children, through all the years that followed, he had treasured her. Not despite her age, not in spite of her limitations, but because of who she was. Adelaide Morrison, strong and capable and worthy of love. The years continued their steady march. Adelaide eventually passed the management of the boarding house to a younger couple who had worked with them for years, and she and Samuel spent more time traveling, visiting their children and grandchildren, seeing parts of the country they had never explored. They took a trip to San Francisco, rode the new cable cars, and marveled at the ocean. They went to Denver and saw the growing city that was becoming a hub of culture and commerce. But they always returned to Park City, to the yellow boarding house that had been the setting of their love story, to the mountains that had witnessed their wedding and the births of their children. It was home, not because of the place itself, but because it was where they had built their life together. When Adelaide was 63, she fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. For several terrifying weeks, Samuel barely left her side, holding her hand, reading to her, willing her to fight through the fever and the weakness. Dr. Henderson, now elderly himself, came daily to check on her, shaking his head with amazement at her resilience. "She is a fighter, your wife," he told Samuel. "She has always been a fighter. She fought to have children when I told her it was impossible. She fought to build a life when others said she was too old. And she will fight this, Mr. Morrison. Have faith." Adelaide did fight, and slowly, painfully, she recovered. When she was finally strong enough to sit up in bed, to eat solid food, to joke weakly with Samuel about her close call, he broke down and wept, his head in her lap, his shoulders shaking with the force of his relief. "I thought I was going to lose you," he said, his voice muffled against her nightgown. "I thought you were going to leave me, and I was not ready. I will never be ready to lose you, Adelaide." "Well, you are stuck with me a while longer," Adelaide said, running her fingers through his white hair. "I am too stubborn to die now, Samuel. We have grandchildren to spoil and years left to live. Death will just have to wait." And it did wait, for years more. Adelaide regained her strength and her health, and she and Samuel continued to live fully, to love deeply, to treasure each moment they had together. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, their 35th, watching their family grow and expand, watching their legacy of love spread through their children and grandchildren. James's children grew up and started families of their own. Claire's twins brought home people they intended to marry, and the Morrison family continued to expand in wonderful, unpredictable ways. And through it all, at the center of it all, were Samuel and Adelaide, the couple who had defied expectations, who had proven that love was not limited by age or bound by conventional wisdom. On a warm September evening when Adelaide was 68 and Samuel was 73, they sat together on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Samuel's health had begun to decline over the past year, his heart not as strong as it once was, and they both knew that their time together was growing shorter. "Samuel," Adelaide said quietly, her hand finding his in the fading light, "thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing me when others looked past me. Thank you for loving me when I thought I was too old to be loved. Thank you for giving me James and Claire and this beautiful, impossible life. You kept your promise, Samuel. You treasured every moment." "It was easy," Samuel said, his voice rougher than it had been in his youth but no less sincere. "You made it easy, Adelaide. You are the best decision I ever made, the greatest adventure I ever embarked on. Marrying you, building this life with you, it has been my privilege and my joy." They sat there as the stars began to appear, as the town settled into its evening rhythms, as the air grew cool with the approach of autumn. Inside the house, the current managers of the boarding house were preparing supper. Down the street, their children and grandchildren were living their own lives, carrying forward the lessons and the love that Samuel and Adelaide had given them. Samuel died peacefully in his sleep 6 months later, on a cold March night with Adelaide beside him. She woke to find him gone, his hand still in hers, his face peaceful. The grief was enormous, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her, but Adelaide weathered it the way she had weathered every storm in her life, with strength, with dignity, and with the support of the family that she and Samuel had created together. At the funeral, James spoke about his father's love for his mother, about how Samuel had taught him what it meant to truly treasure another person. Claire read a poem that made everyone cry. And Adelaide, dressed in black but with her head held high, thanked everyone for coming to celebrate the life of the man who had chosen her when others said she was too old, who had loved her without reservation, who had given her the greatest gift imaginable, a life full of love and purpose and joy. Adelaide lived for another 8 years after Samuel's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still involved in the community, still strong and capable and remarkable. She never remarried, never even considered it. She had had her great love, her once-in-a-lifetime partnership, and nothing could replace or replicate what she and Samuel had shared. When she died at 76, peacefully in her sleep just as Samuel had, the entire town of Park City mourned. The funeral was attended by hundreds, testament to the impact she had made on her community. And on her gravestone, which was placed beside Samuel's in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking town, her children had inscribed words that told the story of her life. Adelaide Vance Morrison, 1841–1917. Wife, mother, grandmother. They said she was too old, but she proved them wrong. She was treasured every moment of her remarkable life. James and Claire, now middle-aged themselves with families of their own, stood beside the graves of their parents and felt overwhelming gratitude for the legacy they had been given. Their parents had shown them that love was not limited by age, that happiness could be found at any stage of life, that it was never too late to begin again. The yellow boarding house still stood in Park City, still welcoming travelers and providing a warm place to stay. And sometimes on quiet evenings, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of laughter of Samuel and Adelaide in their kitchen, of James and Claire playing in the garden, of a family that should not have existed but did, thriving against all odds, proof that love truly could conquer all. The story of Samuel and Adelaide Morrison became part of Park City's folklore, told and retold over the years. It was the story of a cowboy who saw past society's expectations to the remarkable woman beneath. It was the story of a widow who found the courage to love again, to hope again, to build a new life. It was the story of children who were miracles, of a family that defied the odds, of love that treasured every single moment. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy they left behind. Not just their children and grandchildren and the family that continued to grow and flourish, but the knowledge that it is never too late for love, that age is just a number, and that the most precious thing in life is to be truly, deeply, completely treasured by another person. Samuel had given that gift to Adelaide, and in return she had given him everything, her heart, her trust, her love, and the family they created together. They said she was too old for childbirth. They said she should not remarry, should not hope for children, should accept that her life was essentially over at 38. But Samuel Morrison married her anyway, not despite what they said, but because he knew the truth that others could not see. Adelaide Vance was a treasure beyond price, and every moment with her was a gift to be cherished. And cherish her he did, from that first day on the boarding house porch until his last breath, and beyond that into the legacy they left behind, the children and grandchildren who carried their love forward into future generations. It was a love story for the ages, set against the rugged beauty of the Wild West, proof that the greatest adventures are not found in gold or silver, but in the courage to love against all odds, to build a life together, and to treasure every single moment along the way.